Your what? My
And they broke in 8 months. You'll get a new pair. You know, just work your
Oh, sorry, it's on the iPod. 21st century invention iPod.
Women and children out in a lifeboat from the sinking Titanic to get back on. Give him the lifeboat and tell him it's the best thing for them. And they go down in history.
You don't think that you can talk people into this sort of thing?
Because I get irritated too easily.
It does though.
What? Are you ready,
Yes.
Mommy? Whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Joe, are you ready?
I'm going to start with the video first. Okay. I'm Grace, and I'm going to be doing my presentation on the Apple iPod. It's invention, one of the main inventions of the 21st century, in my opinion. Does anyone here not have an iPod or some form of it? Okay. Well, mostly pretty much anyone I know has an iPod, and it's pretty much been an invention of its own in that it's an MP3 player that's been so small and convenient. I'm just going to tell you about the history of the iPod and then tell you a little bit about the father of the iPod, the inventor, and then I'll tell you about how it's progressed since when it first came out in 2001 to now. It was created under the code name Dulcimer, and it was pretty much kept top secret. Only 30 people worked on it in the Apple workplace, and even when they did work on it and tested it, they kept it in a shoebox-sized container, and no one was allowed to talk about it. Even people who worked for Apple didn't know what they were working on. They just assumed it was another form of the Mac. The creation of it was announced on October 23rd, 2001. Apple rented out an auditorium close by the studios, and they announced it. Most people had their doubts about it because they thought, oh, it's probably not going to work, and it's kind of, it's really expensive, and it wasn't compatible with Windows. It only worked with Mac. So a lot of people had their doubts. It was $400, so they assumed that most people wouldn't really want to pay for that. It was a small hard drive, and it's a hard drive-based player, and you link it to iTunes, so it was kind of to counter pirating with music, and it allowed people to not have to worry about CDs or anything like that. They could have portable music with them. The creator is Tony Fadell. He was a former employee of General Magic and then Philips. He was actually working for Philips when he came up with the idea of the iPod. He envisioned an MP3 player that was had a small hard drive-based player, and there had been other MP3s out when he thought of this, but none of them were really that successful, and they had a lot of glitches to them. So he pitched the idea to Real Networks first, and they weren't really too hot about it because they were making a lot of money on their television and music-based industry, and they really didn't want to waste time, money, or just energy on a product they weren't sure would make money, and I'm sure they're really sorry about that now because Apple pretty much took them over. And then he went to Philips, and they also pretty much had the same reaction. They just weren't interested. So as a last-ditch effort, he went to Apple. He was pretty sure they would say no because they'd already failed pretty much with other products they'd come out with, like the Newton. So they had pretty much sworn off any sort of consumer electronic. But when he told them his idea, they were actually really excited about it, the executives of Apple. So they hired him right away and gave him a team of 30 people. And he was pretty worried at first that Apple wouldn't provide the products necessary to form this MP3 player, so he went shopping around. And he found a company that had just started that was making their form of MP3 player, and they were working with IBM. But IBM wasn't really working with them very well because they wanted to have a memory-based player that had a Bluetooth connected to it, and that really wasn't Fidel's vision. So the company he had found ended up merging with him, and the rest of the time he was working on the iPod, he just used their MP3 player and perfected it, because originally it could only hold 10 songs. And it was called Portal Player. So it took him about 8 months to come up with the iPod, to release the iPod. And it had 5 gigabytes, a Toshiba hard drive, and it was about the size of a quarter. As you can see, the first one was really chunky, and the wheel sticks out. This was on the first generation one. It also was the first MP3 to have high-resolution display, and it has a lithium polymer battery, which could last. That was one of the problems with the Portal player. The battery only lasted about 3 hours, and so Fidel perfected it so that it would last longer than that. And it was also the first to introduce the scroll wheel, which kind of worried people at first. They thought it was kind of weird and that it would be hard to work with, but it ended up being easier. And then the only problem with the iPod was that you couldn't use it with Windows. You could only use it with Apple. So Fidel then worked on, it was released in 2001, and then by 2002 it was compatible with Windows PC, and he also upped the gigabytes to 20. And then with the third generation iPod, he upped the gigabytes to 40. So it had a lot more memory, and you could hold a lot more songs on it. And it also came out with, you could watch videos on it, so you could had more memory for that too. And then in 2003, they announced that they would start an iPod family. And that's when they released the Mini, which is a little smaller and a lot less expensive. It doesn't hold quite as much. It only holds about 20 gigabytes. But it's a lot more convenient. You can go exercising with it, or it's just easy to put in your pocket. And with the fourth generation, in 2004, they even started, BMWs started putting portals in the dashboard, so you could put your iPod in that, and then you could just, by hitting the channel dial, it would change your songs. So it pretty much, from the third and fourth generation, Fidel saw his dreams come true, that he had produced a product, the iPod, and an industry was centered around it. And then also now you can see with like iPod phone, with iTouch phone, you can start taking pictures now. So you can just kind of see how each year it's progressed, and it really hasn't been that long. It's only been about 8 years since the iPod first came out. But you can see how it's just perfected. Pretty much it's inspiring seeing Fidel's story, because he was rejected at first and he didn't give up. And now the iPod has pretty much become one of the most popular MP3 players around. So that was really inspiring to me. So that's the story.
43.